Good morning and welcome everyone to our first Unconventional Careers panel discussion. My name is Michael Chandler, I'll be the moderator, and I'm joined here today by three of our alum, but also three entrepreneurs who have gone out into the world and maybe followed non-conventional career paths, if you will. I'd like to introduce Adam Jacobs, excuse me, Matthew Bright and Katerina Kamali. So the theme for today's discussion, or our panel discussion, is going to be the path less trod, if you will. We call it the dark horse theory or methodology, if you will. And that is that in today's world, there are conventional careers in which we all know and love and believe that that's the right path to take. But in the ever-changing landscape that we find ourselves in today, there are more unconventional careers and more unconventional ways in which to fulfill those career aspirations. The dark horse mindset, if you will, is following passions, following interests, vocational aspirations that take you on a more non-conventional career path, but deliver you to, I guess, where you wanted to be in the first place and in a much more rewarding sense. So that's what we're here to talk about today. The Unconventional Career Series with three alum, three of our entrepreneurs who have gone the path less chosen, to share their experiences, to share their career journeys, if you will, and to impart a bit of knowledge on how they got to where they are today by less traditional means. So we'll make a start. Guys, if I could just start off, maybe just one by one, just introducing yourselves quickly and a little bit of your bio as well.
Sure, so my name's Adam Jacobs. I'm the founder of The Iconic, which is Australia's largest online fashion retailer, and also a company called Hatch, which is a jobs marketplace for young people. I studied philosophy and business at Sydney Uni a long time ago. Actually, walking into the building today reminded me of just how long ago it was, and spent some time in strategy consulting in a more conventional path, if you like, and then sort of took the leap into a less conventional path when I founded The Iconic back in 2011.
Thank you. Matt?
My name is Matthew Bright. I work over at Zipco. We're a $4 billion payments company listed on the ASX, and I spent 4 years building a company that Zip acquired about a year ago, and we've just rebranded as Zip Business. I studied a Bachelor of Arts and a Master of Commerce at Sydney and work on the Business Alumni Network, mentor a few students, and it's actually where I came up with the idea for this series in exploring more unconventional paths and knowing when to veer off the traditional kind of banking or consulting thing and follow your passions and make things work.
Katerina?
So my name's Katerina. I started also in a slightly conventional career path in consulting and energy, but pretty quickly took a step off to found Pollinate Energy, and have since stayed in the area of investing and venture capital investing, and now infrastructure and institutional investing in climate and in sustainability. So I've sort of weaved in and out of conventional and unconventional, and have enjoyed both.
Great, awesome. All right, thanks guys. So as we can see, cross-section of both big business, I guess, and then starting off on their own passions and pursuits. So a perfect test case or group to have this conversation. So what I want to do is just very much make this a conversation as possible. If I can go along and everyone give their first take on, I guess, what was your first... What I want to do is take it back a step. Okay, so let's take it right back to the transition from university into the career world. Okay, something that I guess we call the audience will be able to resonate with. So we'll take it back to the early days. So tell me about, please, your first job as a newly minted graduate of Sydney Uni.
Sure. I think for me, coming out of university, I certainly felt the social expectations or pressures around like moving into a conventional path, and it means different things at different eras, I suppose. Like back then, this is 2006 when I graduated. 2006, yeah. It was sort of law, consulting, maybe a little bit of engineering, not so much. Today, maybe it's more like tech. It changes over time. But so I was really keen on consulting and just loved the idea of solving diverse problems across a range of industries and working with really brilliant, bright people. So applied to a bunch of consulting firms, got into none of them, mostly because I think I didn't focus enough on my grades in the first couple of years of uni. So I just didn't hit this quite arbitrary grade bar that the consulting firms applied. So instead, My first job was with a hotel group called Accor, which is a large global group. They have, Novotel and Sofitel and a bunch of others. And I was developing hotels, so buying, selling, doing management agreements, franchise agreements all around APAC. Loved that, actually learned a lot about it, particularly from the person I reported to. That was the main value of my first job, was just learning from my manager. And then a year later, I actually ended up going into consulting, first into PwC and then into BCG. So I think my starting story is one where I very much felt the pull or the need of like fulfilling some social expectations of like whether it be family or friends or just the community around me, and just found the path to do that.
Awesome. Matt?
So I didn't have the traditional grad job. I started out at Sydney doing my BA undergrad, working for a couple of entrepreneurs, building a music festival business. So that was probably what really cut my teeth into having entrepreneurial DNA from the get-go. I guess like Adam said, I probably felt the social expectation to go onto a more conservative path, and I was actually really fortunate to work for a partner at a top-tier law firm and thought I'd do grad law like most humanities students. And I found myself, I guess, on the inside of what Facebook investor Peter Thiel said, like, when he started as a lawyer, I found myself on the inside of a place where people inside were trying to get out and outside were trying to get in. So I actually enrolled in the Master of Commerce at Sydney, and at that stage, 2006, everybody wants to be an investment banker. Never happened. Great thing it didn't. Found what I was really interested in. Excelled in entrepreneurship units of study, innovation and that side of things. But I was really early. There wasn't actually that much happening in Australia like there is now in that space. So I did the banking thing, and then down the track, eventually I got to, I guess, the objectives and interests and things that university fostered, and ended up in the tech space.
Katerina?
Yeah, I guess I realised pretty early on that I had to be super motivated if I was going to get up and do this every day. And for me, I had been quite active in the climate movement at university, and so kind of bled that into my initial job, and got lucky. It was quite an exciting time in the climate space here. I was a consultant and then joined the Office of the Premier to do some really interesting work on climate policy in Australia. But then, quite quickly you realise, I think, it's not just about motivation, it's also about sort of skills. And as much as I loved working for other people and in giant machines, that actually I loved having autonomy and independence and things like that. So I pretty quickly moved from that first role to do a bit more study. I did my master's and started my PhD at the London School of Economics as a way really to kind of get a bit of a better understanding of myself and meet some more people and some more paths. And from that, my PhD led into founding of my business, which then sort of took over my life. But definitely having that mixture of motivation around sort of climate and sustainability and poverty, and if you don't solve one of those, you can't solve the other, being the motivation, but then the practical application of that being in an entrepreneurial path rather than working always sort of in a larger corporate or government job.
That's interesting, because that leads into the next question I had around, do you believe that your degree or your experience at uni really gave you those tools to be able to go out and follow those passions?
I do, but I think it's nuanced. I think, if you have a passion area, say it's climate or say it's tech or say it's humanities, my experience running a company is that actually you need every different skill set working on that area. So we need, great people in tech, we need great people, in HR, we need the whole smattering. So if you have an area that you love working on, and you know that you're good at, and a passion, that's the best bit. Like, I just don't think that you need to assume that you need to be an environmental scientist to work on climate. Absolutely not the case. What I really need is, great people in tech, really. So, it's you can sort of combine your passion, your skills quite a lot, I think, more than most people conventionally think about it when they look at these different areas.
Okay. Adam, you raised a really interesting point before around coming out and openly acknowledging the marks. How was that for you, I guess, when you experienced a little bit of rejection, I guess, when you came out? Yeah. How did you channel those emotions? How did you deal with, I guess, rejection at an early stage coming out of uni?
Yeah, I guess the first thing to say is I don't regret it at all. Like, I wouldn't go back and focus more on my marks. The reason why my marks suffered was, in the first 2 years at uni, I joined the Sydney Uni American football team and played wide receiver.
Yeah.
And it was like this really unusual thing to do in Australia, play American football. And it was so much fun. It was like this community, and we like built the club, and we like really got into it. And I learned as much through doing that as I did through studying. It was this whole rich life experience. So like I wouldn't change that. What I did, I was struck with, hang on a second, like how do I deal with this rejection? And I think the way I dealt with it was honestly just to double down on like work ethic. I was like, I thought I could cruise through here on some natural ability. I'm wrong. You've actually got to work for what you want. So now I'm going to work at it. And I made sure that my first job, I like really put myself into and learnt from and performed in, and was able to tell that story when I then made a subsequent application to a consulting firm, and they looked at that experience and said, this person was rejected, but look what they've now done. They've worked hard, and we should value that experience. That's the lesson I took out of it.
That's really good messaging. That's really good. And Matt, I want to, because you came straight out of the bat with a more entrepreneurial or obscure view, if you will, compared to the. How did you part your course? Was it what feels good right now at the time, or did you have an end goal in mind that you were like leapfrogging to get towards? How did you piece that together?
Probably the inverse of having an end goal. Like I think I just actively worked on things I was really interested in and on and off curriculum, and figured out what I was good at. And I think just on top of what Adam was saying in terms of the marks, like I think your capstone project at university is equally as important as the marks, and that's often the thing that gets you over the line. And for me, that was a Silicon Valley field trip. That was an infrastructure funds paper that I wrote at university, which you create these pieces of IP that, I think as a student, you can really use LinkedIn and get those out there and link in with people who that matters to, and it really resonates. And that is, for me, is like much more substantive than what your marks are. And, I found myself in Europe and working in a Dutch bank, and that infrastructure funds thing was one of the things that actually got me hired to work in principal investing years later. So you never know what you create now and then the direction that your career takes, and those little kind of door openers that you have that you've worked on, the value.
Katerina, with your work on climate advocacy, that was at a time where was it a bit early for where we are now? And how did you I guess, pursue an area that was maybe a little bit ahead of its time, or didn't have the focus that it certainly has now?
Yeah, it was, but I actually pick up on your point there that I think that it was unique in that it had, a bit of a point of difference, but I really used, particularly in my master's and my PhD, as an excuse to go out and meet all the awesome people who were doing amazing things. I kind of created a TV series and all these other sort of random, slightly associated with university projects, to basically get the chance to network and to meet these people who I had huge brain crushes on, basically, both in sort of academic world and in sort of the business world as well. So especially at times like now during COVID, when the university's sort of system is slightly different, I do think you need to use the excuse of being at university and studying to help you find paths into meeting different people and creating different opportunities for yourself. That really was the case for me, and was the case in climate as well. So I think, but you can apply that to sort of any area that you're interested in. But using it as an excuse to reach out to mentors, to reach out and create projects where you have an inside track and can pursue something that you really are interested in.
Yeah, one thing that really strikes me with with all three of you is that you all have a very much entrepreneurial, in inverted commas, but very much a go-getter attitude. You've all done things, like you said, doubling down. You're talking about, working with mentors. You're talking about moving into things that you're passionate about. You've all got very much a different view on how to go about your business, but very much a self-starter. So what would be your advice be, I guess, to anyone watching this, as far as maybe don't have or feel that they don't have that quality, or maybe a little bit insular, or maybe that's something foreign, if you will? What would your advice be, I guess, to those out there to just swallow it and go out and put themselves out there?
I think I would pick up on something Katerina was saying earlier around worry less about your plan and worry more about your passion. And I don't think there's a blueprint to success. Like, I've seen people take all sorts of different paths. Like, I have a really close friend who dropped out of uni in first year because he just wanted to build something and didn't have the patience to study. Built a really valuable company, sold it to Apple, worked at Apple for a while, and is now building another really valuable company, and his path looks nothing like mine. But he's probably, one of the most successful entrepreneurs I know. And I guess like when I look at all these people taking different paths, what I take out of it is like there isn't a path you should follow. There's this idea that a career is a ladder and you should map out your steps. Mm-hmm. And my belief is a career is actually like a maze. You really can't predict too far into the future. All you really need to do is think about your next decision and whether you want to go left or right. And make that decision like more with your gut than with your brain. You know, the question is, what would make me feel alive every day? You know, I suppose something that's really difficult is like figuring out your passion or your purpose. And you can't actually sit down in an armchair and figure out your purpose. And in any case, it's something that changes over time. It's more like a pursuit that you have over your life. So all you really need to do is figure out what's going to make you excited right now to get up out of bed and do something that day and go and do that thing and see where it leads you. And that's kind of the most important advice I could give to anyone.
That's a really good point. And you raised that before around you wouldn't have changed anything back in your early days. I want to ask you guys, hindsight's wonderful, right? 20/20 vision, as we've always heard. What would you change, if anything at all? Or what would you say to your younger self now? Ask both of you that same question.
You're going to try some crazy stuff and it'll probably work out. I think, as Adam said, it's definitely a path and a pattern making thing. I think the more risk that you take, or unconventional things that you do, or the way that you go about building your life or your career, the more comfortable you get in that, you know, kind of pattern forming habit style of doing things. And you'll get these great inflection points. You might have a great 3 to 5 years in one job. It's done. You're on to the next one. But it's really, I guess, you don't have to be an entrepreneur to be entrepreneurial. You can put things together on your own terms. And I think that's our theme today about the dark horse mindset. There's the standardization mindset of you pursue this job, you know, based on that career, and that leads to fulfillment. Or you can actually start with something that's fulfilling, and as Adam said, that's going to change at intervals, and then you'll achieve and get excellence out of that. So I think it almost runs contrary to how the way the world is structured a little bit, and it requires a lot more, I guess, ownership and drive to get those things done. But I think, you know, as Katerina was saying, you can go out there, you can create your own TV series. You know, you can, you know, there's so much media available to you that, you know, you're able to create a blog. You know, you can create your own YouTube channel if you want. And that is done well. That's the thing that would stand out in the new world that we've all entered.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't change a thing, even though there's been huge highs and huge lows. But what I would probably say to my younger self is just to let go of all of those, I guess, conventional things we've all talked about, expectations we thought we should do as early as possible. Because at every point, and not to be so disappointed when things don't work out. I've had a bunch of things not work out. You know, I've had 2 voluntary redundancies. One was when I was working for a premier, and then there was a change of government, and then the new premier didn't believe in climate change anymore. And at the time, that was just devastating. I used that money to found my company, which was the best thing that ever happened to me. All of those moments, and it's so sort of, you hear it all the time that one door closes and another opens, but it's so the case. I do every point that has happened. It feels so devastating in the moment, but very quickly you realize, oh, that's why that happened. So just to not get so hung up on the disappointments on the journey, to try and enjoy the whole thing, I think would be the only thing, because it's changed so quickly, and it will change even more quickly, I think, in the next few years, what a career looks like, and what skills you need for that career, that every little bit that you gather along the way always like comes back and is valuable. You just don't always know why.
Yep.
And if I could just add a point on top, just building on that, I think there's actually a misunderstanding in general of like what a career is. And I think when we start, we think a career is an effort to prove ourselves, you know, to like show that we can build skills and make money and achieve title and status and reputation, and to make our parents proud. And you know, a career is like the vehicle to do that, to say to the world, here I am and I've got capabilities and I'm going to prove you how good I am. Maybe I'm simplifying a little bit, but that's kind of how I think we're taught, you know, what careers are. I think a career is actually an opportunity to find ourselves, and it's a really different thing. It's an opportunity to be authentic for a moment and to stop and think, what do I care about and how do I want to contribute to the world? And those 2 different approaches are really different. Like if you start with, I'm going to prove myself, then maybe you go after the investment banking job just because that's the one that people really respect and admire. And I've got a lot of friends who went down that path and hate their life. I won't name them, but they wake up being all like, why did I do this? And I think if you start off with the question of like, what do I really care about and how might I just spend more time on that? That's the kind of the key that leads you to drive, like leads you to finding who you are, makes you feel alive, and makes you like want to go out and contribute to the world. So yeah, I guess that's something that I feel like I learnt too late. At least I've learnt it now, so it's maybe not too late. But wish I'd learnt, or at least wish someone had told me earlier in my career.
That's a really interesting point, and that's something I just want to ask you guys just to finish up this first section. And that is, Katerina, you raised that point before around you've got kids, graduates, whoever they might be, that have sat with parents, have sat with mentors, have sat with lecturers, have sat with trusted teachers at school. This is where we're going, this is what we're doing, this is what I want to do. And that might not be the case, right? It might diverge off that. What advice would you give those youngsters when they have to sit down with those ones, whether it be a spouse, a wife, a partner, a husband, whoever that might be, or a teacher, a mentor, and just say, you know what? I've got this idea. I'm going to back this. How do you feel? How would you go about managing those interactions or those dynamics?
Well, I'll actually call on what a mentor said to me in one of those situations like you were talking about, where I was conflicted between, I kind of had all the consulting offers and I also had just handed in my master's thesis and wanted to move back to India to start my company. And I called a mentor and said, I think I'm going to do this crazy thing and move to India and start this business and say no to the consulting and blah, blah, blah. But every bit of my upbringing and all the people that I had talked to was telling me that this was really dumb. And she said to me, look, I would never have done that 10 years ago. I wanted to be a doctor like my parents, and then I went into investment banking like, I was meant to at that age. But it doesn't really matter what I tell you right now, because if you do take on this, new venture, most likely you'll be the one who's hired. Oh, I was very concerned because I always wanted to work for her. Sorry, I should add that context. Would you still hire me in 5 years if I'd done this crazy thing instead of becoming a consultant? And she was like, it doesn't really matter what I say to you right now, because the question will probably be in 5 years, will you hire me? Which I must say, I would never, because she's still amazing, I would never hire her. But I do think, the dynamics change a lot very quickly. So the questions you would ask and the mentors you reach out to, it does change. And taking these sort of untrodden paths leads you to a set of opportunities that you could have never expected. So I wouldn't always reach out to the same mentors, or if you're reaching out to mentors, then hopefully they have an open enough mind to how quickly things are changing that they won't have always the best advice.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think any kind of risk-taking behaviour is going to alarm a parent or a spouse, but they just need to understand the context and why you're doing what you're doing. And look, I can say that, I jumped on a plane and moved to Amsterdam from scratch. I worked out of the Dutch Public Library there, which was amazing. Pounded the pavement for 6 weeks, had a Frenchman hire me to work in structured energy commodity trade finance. Just a random punt, made it work. Then I had a Dutchman hire me on top of that, and then I ended up in the principal investments group. And it was like something so far out there, but people sort of looked at me like, why are you moving to a foreign country? But okay, I did it, it worked, and it teaches you these skills of resilience and resourcefulness, and I guess it also breaks down, your personal levels of rejection. There's this great study which is called the paperclip test, where somebody started with a paperclip and gradually traded it and got up to a car. So and they tested at Yale and with the student base, and what they found is this kind of tolerance for rejection actually really plateaued over time. So I think you need that resilience to go out there and face harder things and have harder conversations with people. And what's also happened now is what we have in Australia in terms of a functioning tech ecosystem with a few $1 billion of venture capital, and brands like Zip or Afterpay or Atlassian or Canva that are now they're almost like kind of corporate level jobs. And what's emerged there is that's de-risked that field of entrepreneurship. You can go to work in a venture-backed company, you will learn more in a year than you would in 3 years in a grad job in a stodgy old corporate. And why would you want to go work for a boomer in a boomer industry where you can wear jeans and sneakers to work and do fun stuff,